Now, to a conversation with environmentalist Robert Kennedy Jr. and filmmaker Bill Haney. I spoke to them at the Sundance Film Festival in January in Park City, Utah, where Bill Haney's film The Last Mountain premiered. The film looks at coal mining and Massey's devastating practice of mountaintop removal.
An explosive power the size of a Hiroshima bomb once a week.
They just keep this process up until they literally reduce the mountain to rubble.
Coal River Mountain is our last great mountain that hasn't been blasted to ashes.
Massey Coal, the single most destructive coal mining company in history.
That's your coal dust. That's what the inside of the kids' lungs are going to look like.
Massey, hear us!
People have had enough, and they're standing up to the coal company.
The fight over Coal River Mountain is a fight about democracy.
Robert Kennedy Jr. is lending his voice.
How can Massey Coal have 60,000 violations and nobody in the state came and stopped them?
We want our kids in a safe new school.
National average for brain tumor is 1 in 100,000, and we had 6 that lived side by side. The only thing we have in common is the fact that we all have well water.
Mountaintop coal mining is literally threatening the water supplies of tens of millions of people.
We live in a very intelligent country that has the ability to create energy without blowing up mountains.
We're looking at a proposal now to construct a wind farm in Coal River Mountain.
That's our last mountain. That's the last one we had.
Corporations do not want democracy. They want profits.
They're bound and determined to knock the mountain down. We're bound and determined to stop it.
It's either them or Massey, and Massey's been winning for a long time.
Coal is mean, coal's cruel, and coal kills. The American people need to find their position. You're connected to coal, whether you realize it or not. Everybody's connected to this, and everybody's causing it, and everybody's allowing it.
I can hear your voice in that building back there!
If the American people could see it, there'd be a revolution in this country.
Coal mining in West Virginia. The film's director is here, Bill Haney, as well as Robert Kennedy Jr. He is the founder of the Waterkeeper Alliance, and he is one of the people who is featured in this film. Very important today as we see the latest report that's come out on Massey, holding Massey Coal Company responsible for the terrible explosion that took place last year and took the lives of 29 miners. Bill, let's begin with you. First of all, talk about why you call your film The Last Mountain and fit it into the context of this latest explosion of Massey.
Well, The Last Mountain is a film about the fight for the last great mountain in central Appalachia between the mining company, Massey, that wants to blow it up and strip the coal inside, and the locals who want to stop them and build a wind farm on top instead. And it's a story about citizen democracy. It's about the extraordinary group of waitresses and former Marines and former coal miners who've come together and enlisted the help of folks like Bobby Kennedy Jr. to try to fight for their rights. And it's a story about the future of energy, because the ugly paw of the coal industry lies heavy upon our political system and on our environment. So that's why we called it The Last Mountain, because they've already knocked down, with explosives the size of a Hiroshima bomb being dropped on Appalachia every week, they've already taken 500 of these mountains down to rubble and dumped the residuals into the rivers, contaminating 2,000 miles of federal river, and there's not much left.
And Massey, in particular, this coal company, one of the largest in the United States, and relate Last Mountain to what the Upper Big Branch explosion that took place.
Well, I think that Massey controls all the mountains in the Coal River Valley, including Coal River Mountain, that's at the center of our story. It's the largest practitioner of this most egregious form of mining, mountaintop removal. And it's been operated in a way that seems to be wildly beyond the bounds of federal constraint and state constraint for quite some time. So their history of safety violations and environmental violations is so long as to be dizzying. And they, for many, many, many years appear to have decided that it was less expensive to pay the fines and sort out something with the political system than it was to actually comply with the environmental rules, the Clean Water Act, or safety standards. And so horrible as the Big Branch explosion was, it was utterly predictable. In fact, I was doing interviews right before it took place, and every interview I did, who were talking about the history of Massey's safety violations, would say, it's going to happen again, it's going to happen again soon, and literally months later, there it was. The same thing with their environmental practices. You know, they had, their federal law says that if you violate the Clean Water Act, it's a $31,000 fine. In a 6-year period, they were agreed that they had 60,000 violations, almost $1.8 billion in fines. The state EPA refused to do anything. The federal EPA took a very long time and ultimately agreed to a fine of $20 million, which was less than 1% of actually what was required by the federal statutes. And in the 6 months after that, Massey came up with another 4,000 violations. So it would appear to be a company that used its profits to buy political influence and to operate a system that was almost entirely outside the law. So it's an example that we see other examples in the coal industry, but it's a particularly egregious example. And the brutality that they are bringing to the landscape of Appalachia and to the communities of Appalachia is extraordinary. And they do it by talking about that they're going to protect jobs or they're going to have domestically secure energy sources. But there are, of course, wildly more cost-effective and healthy other domestic sources of energy like wind and solar. And the employment that they provide is actually quite small. They've been probably the leader, the United Mine Workers would say the leader, in destroying the unions in the system. So at the time the CEO was making $30 million a year.
Don Blankenship. Don
Blankenship. You know, there are miners working there who are getting a pathetic fraction of what they would have gotten even 10 years ago when they had protection with the unions. So they've destroyed the unions, they've beaten up on the environment, they've violated federal health and safety standards to what appears to be really the enrichment of a very small number of people, primarily the executives of the company.
Bobby Kennedy, you're a major focus of this film because of your work in West Virginia taking on the coal companies. When did you go down originally? What have you been doing there?
I've been involved in the industry, in the coal industry in West Virginia, on and off for 27 years. I was invited down about 3 or 4 years ago by the local group at Coal Mountain to help them in their battle to save this last mountain. As Bill says, Massey Coal is the 3rd largest coal company in the country, but it is by far the biggest practitioner of mountaintop removal mining. Over the past decade, they have leveled an area of the Appalachians the size of Delaware, 1.4 million acres. They've cut down 500 of the biggest mountains in the state. And they've buried, as Bill said, thousands of miles of rivers and streams. They have to break the law to do this. They cannot survive in the marketplace without violating the law. They violate labor laws, they violate health and safety laws, and by their own records, they've had some 67,000 violations of just one of the environmental statutes, but they're in violation of many, many other environmental statutes. Last year, I debated Don Blankenship in West Virginia in front of a statewide audience, a televised debate, and I asked him during the debate, is it possible for you to do your job without breaking the law? And he said, no, it is not. So this is a criminal enterprise, even by his own estimation. As Bill says, you know, one of the things that they always say in West Virginia is, well, coal brings jobs and prosperity to the state. But this is one of the things that my father explained to me when I was 14 years old and he was fighting strip mining in Appalachia. He said, this ought to be the richest state in the union because of the huge resources they have in West Virginia, but it's the 49th poorest population because the benefits of coal do not help the people of the state of West Virginia. And if you look at the way that Massey operates, Massey doesn't want to hire, it won't hire unions. Its whole business plan has been to break the United Mine Workers, which it succeeded in doing in the state. When I was a little kid, there was 151,000 coal miners in West Virginia taking coal out of tunnels in the ground. Today, there are fewer than 18,000 left in the state, and most of them aren't unionized because the strip industry isn't, because Massey broke the unions. They're taking more coal out of West Virginia than they were in 1968. But the money is not staying in the state for salaries or pensions or reinvestment in the community. It goes straight up to Wall Street. 95% of the coal in West Virginia is owned by out-of-state interests. And Massey doesn't like to hire, it won't hire union labor, but not only that, it doesn't like to hire people who have a union culture. So it won't hire, if it can help it, West Virginians. So it advertises in Myrtle Beach and the Atlanta Constitution and USA Today to bring people into the state. They work on these sites cutting down the mountain. It takes about 6 years for them to cut down in a mountain, and then they move someplace else. They buy up the communities. They've bought up dozens and dozens of communities. They board up the houses. They make the people sign contracts saying that they'll never come back within 20 miles of that community. And they empty the landscapes of people. So then they come to us and say, well, we're bringing prosperity in West Virginia. What we say to them is, why is it that the places with the most coal in this state are the places with the poorest people? How can you bring prosperity to a community when you're emptying the community? Well, this film is about a group of people in West Virginia who said, we're not leaving. We're going to stay here. We're going to protect our mountains. And they climbed up trees and built tree houses. They confronted the industry. They demonstrated in front. They walked into the governor's office. They had public demonstrations. You know, one of the reasons that I'm interested in what's happened in West Virginia, and that Bill really got interested in doing the film here, is that it's not just about the destruction of the environment. It's about the subversion of democracy. And wherever you see widespread environmental injury, you're also going to see the subversion of democracy, and West Virginia is really the template for that dynamic. You'll see the destruction of the public process at the local level, where people are no longer have a say in the allocation of the public trusted resources of the commons. You'll see the destruction of transparency in government. You'll see the capture of the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution. They become, in West Virginia, the West Virginia DEP has become the sock puppet to the industry that it's supposed to regulate. You'll see the widespread corruption of public officials, which you also see virtually every relevant public official in the state of West Virginia is now an indentured servant for the coal industry. And you'll also see the destruction of the press and the role of the Fourth Estate. And again, in West Virginia, you see the press largely blind, holding a blind eye to this wholesale destruction of the landscapes and to the people whose lives are being destroyed in this process that's making a few people rich by systematically impoverishing virtually everybody else in the state.
Robert Kennedy, environmental lawyer, speaking to Democracy Now! At the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, along with film director Bill Haney. His film is called The Last Mountain. Stay with us.